Thanks for joining us. Really excited to have you here for this session on product innovation and market success. Today, we are joined by none other than Walter B. Herbst, Ph.D., an acclaimed author, professor, and founder of Herbst Produkt. If you want to skip to the next slide, Walter. Perfect. So we're going to go through some just quick introductions and overview, and then I'm going to kick the controls over to Walter, who's going to talk through a little bit about the DNA of failure, a formula for success or set factors that can help products succeed in the market. And then he's going to talk about the product development process. Walter is an acclaimed author, professor, and founder of Herbst Produkt. He's not only led groundbreaking work across a diverse range of industries, but he's also an Edison Awards honoree for his innovative contributions. His expertise in product design, development, and innovation is captured in his acclaimed book, Mastering Product Innovation. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to check it out. I will be dropping the link to the book in the comments section here, so feel free to click through and purchase that or check it out from your local library. As it'll be great for follow-up information for today's webinar. In this session, Walter's going to unpack some of the most pressing challenges faced by innovators and corporations alike, including why even the most groundbreaking ideas can fail in the market. He'll take us through some of the essential variables of desirability, feasibility, and viability, and offer actionable insights of how to transform an idea into a successful market-ready product. A couple quick notes, housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, so if you don't want your face on the video in perpetuity, I'd suggest turning off your video now. We ask that you all stay muted during the session so that we don't get any background noise, and we will send you a copy of the recording at the end of the session. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Myself and Sherry will help kind of gather these so that we can jump into a really great Q&A at the end of Walter's presentation, and we'll go from there. And so with that, I will pass it over to you, Walter.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So indeed, what we're going to be doing today is a really brief overview of the book. And thanks for commenting that you should read it. I mean, you really should. So I'm going to go through highlights that will, I think, give you a very broad overview of what this is all about. And if you've read it, terrific. If you haven't, you'll start picking up more details. But the way I want to start this is how the book starts, and it starts with understanding opportunities and user research, as opposed to what most of us get in our lives, and I must say very unfortunately, and that is that someone makes an assumption. Someone just says, I think we ought to do this. I have an idea. And besides as was just noted, besides my professional life with Herbst Produkt, run by son Scott Herbst, I've been at Northwestern University for 25 years, teaching this subject matter. And my dean has always said the following, and it's absolutely terrific. There's no prize for solving correctly what proves to be the wrong problem. Really need to think about that one. There is no prize for solving correctly what proves to be the wrong problem. So let's I mean, look at the slide that's up there. Now, it's historic, I get that. Some of it is, some of it will be more contemporary. But here, let's go back to Google. In 2011, $29 billion of revenue, they come up with this thing called Google Glass. You may remember it. I sure do. I was at the show when they introduced it, the CES show in Vegas. And the whole thing was so outrageous at the time that anybody that was even wearing it, they were all called Google ass. I mean, it was horrific. So there's a really smart big company, 29 billion in revenue, and they do that at that moment in history. Disaster. Go further back. Apple comes out with Newton, big company at the time, obviously a lot smaller than today, but $6.3 billion, total disaster. Microsoft comes out with Zune in 2006, almost a $40 billion company. I mean, we just keep going, for Lord's sakes. Iridium, all those satellites that Motorola put up, $5 billion to launch them. Does anyone remember the beginning of that thing? It was a total disaster. Total disaster in the following. I need to just calm down a little bit on that one. But supposedly this was the way to communicate from any place you were in the world, dot, 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 as long as you were outside. If you were in the middle of a building, it didn't work. If you were in Antarctica and it's freaking 20 degrees below zero, you better get outside if you want to use your Iridium phone. This is Motorola. Well, it was Motorola. So now it's used just for emergency purposes. A lot of smaller ships, boats will use it. You can rent it, but disaster. Segway. We're going to talk about Segway in a little bit. I certainly talk about it. I certainly talk about it in the book. So here we are looking at Segway, and if y'all remember, boy, that was going to change the world. Do you remember that one? Oh, we're going to do it with cars. We're going to do it with this. We're going to do it with that. There was a major recall just about when they were actually selling the company because of a lot of mechanical issues that they had. The recall only showed that 30,000 units were sold in that entire history of time. But we'll talk about that one a little bit. Remember Galaxy 7 in Samsung? You tried to get on an airplane, they'd ask you if you had a Galaxy 7 phone, and they took it away from you. And we just keep going. Oh, this was one. This came out a couple of years ago, Juicero. Really a slick looking little device. Really sweet. $400. And you got a bag of orange juice and you put it in there and it squeezed the orange juice. And people said, are you kidding me? Why don't I just buy the damn bag of orange juice? I'll squeeze it myself. And they had raised a couple of $100 million. Galaxy Fold, the Galaxy Fold unit, pre-orders totally sold out. The launch was pulled. Remember when Apple did their FaceTime, what happens on your phone stays on your phone? So what you're looking at here, folks, is some staggering numbers. Less than 3% of all new consumer packaged goods exceed first-year sales of $50 million. Now, $50 million is a lot of money, but we're talking about some major companies. Less than 3% actually get to that number. Here's the one that'll scare you, but maybe not. You've probably all lived it. More than 30,000 new consumer products launched each year, and 80% of them fail. That's staggering. Here's a couple that they were so abysmal that they barely even made it. Coca-Cola, 2022. So for whatever inspired, well, what inspired them were gamers. So they decided they had a new brand, believe it or not. You probably never came across it. I did. It was called Born in the Universe. It was Sugar Bite, B-Y-T-E. Anyone hear of it? Nope. It's Coca-Cola. In the book, I do a little piece on the beautiful aesthetic Apple wireless mouse. Just gorgeous. It belongs in the Museum of Modern Art. It is spectacular. Oops, the USB port is on the bottom. So when you when you go to charge it, this thing looks like a turtle upside down. You took this gorgeous aesthetic and just totally screwed the thing up. So here's the question. Why do so many products that inventors and developers believe to be great never make it in the market? I mean, what the heck is going on? So if we were in the classroom right now, I'd have you chit-chatting with your colleagues and talking about it. But think about it for a minute. What should they have done to increase the odds? I just think about that. Just think about it. So what we're going to do, I want to start out with what I'm calling formula for success. And I'm going to then support this with a lot of visuals. And we call it, and again, I spend a lot of time on this in the book, called set factors. So I tell a little story about an entrepreneur that we've done a lot of work for, and he made his living early on by chap's name is T.J. Simeon, and he was always looking for something, generally in the Orient, that he could bring to America. Classic entrepreneurial chap. He came across a nifty little device in Asia that really helped your breath. They were just little pieces of whatever, mint loaded paper. And they really helped. I mean, it was spectacular in Asia. So TJ decided this was going to be a really good little item for him. And because socially, so we're on the letter S, socially, they worked in Asian countries really well. Technically, they were fine. They did what they were supposed to do. This gets interesting because TJ at the time never appreciated the economics and, more importantly, the value proposition, in that they really were valuable, but he was trying to bring them over and just pass the raw costs along and barely make any money at it. And because of that value proposition that he set up, absolutely failed, fell on its nose, except for the reality that Listerine recognized what the heck this guy was doing. And they picked it up and they said, this value proposition is $1.49, not 79 cents. They sold 100 million of them in the year 2002. So I'm just barely touching on set factors with a very entrepreneurial story, but I want to get more involved and get into this a little deeper and then get into more specifics. So social, you have to consider all of your interactions, all of your influences, all of the work patterns, the health issues, the political, the environment, the entertainment. That's social. You must consider all of the economics of what you're dealing with. What's the value proposition? Is anyone going to support this venture? Will they spend money, resources? Will they acquire it? Technology, it has to get to an arena where the user will accept, especially if it's new technology. This thing has to work. So let's just carry on. Bury that set factors into your brain, SET. If you can align all of these, social, technology, and economic, we get what's called a product opportunity gap. They have to align. So this guy was remarkable. To be honest, it took a few years for this thing to really get put together. But he loved upsetting the apple cart. Henry Ford loved it. So let's look at what he was dealing with these set factors. Had the technology, Model T Ford, spectacular. Certainly all the technology is there. So we've got the T really nailed. What's the problem? Well, he still has the social and the economics. And if you go back in time and start thinking a wee bit about the economics of this thing, if you were one of wealth, it worked. It was just fine. But that was not where Ford was trying to take this. He had to figure out how the heck were we really going to get to. In his case, the first thing he was worrying about is most folks simply couldn't afford it. So what Ford did, it's absolutely remarkable. It's in 1914. He absolutely doubles the daily pay for all of his workers, which then transitioned into the rest of the country. So all of a sudden, pay was doubling. He's figured it out. Higher wages, his own workers could actually purchase this thing. So now he's got the S, he's got the T, and he has the economics. His people can afford it. What's going on? Still wasn't where Ford thought this thing should go. So the social thing then he then recognized the reality of the critical importance to his company, to his workers, to the fact that they now have more money. And in spite of what you may have heard from one of the presidential candidates, that the unions that came along and said, "Ooh, we're going to go to a 5-day work week." No, 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 no. Henry Ford, 1926, says we're going to go to a 5-day work week. By the way, unions didn't come along. UAW actually started in 1935. So now Ford's got the thing figured out. 1926, 5-day work week. Everyone is making twice what they ever made in this country. And he's got the set factors all put together. People now have weekends. The roaring 20s. We've got jazz clubs going on. We have sports, we have golf, we have tennis. And so he nailed it, figured it out, and that became, as far as I was concerned, the absolute standard for clarifying what the set factors should be for all of us. There's another way to look at this, but it's just a different way to look at it, in that we go from social technology and economics into desirability, feasibility, and viability. And I don't care which way you play it; it doesn't matter. It's the same scenario. It's just different words. But again, I want to take it back to Dean Kamen a little bit, because he's my poster child for failure on this one. So clearly had the technology. Socially, oh my gracious. It I mean, think about this thing. A number of cities in the United States were actually saying, boy, not on our sidewalks. Um, and then when you thought about it, wait a minute, I have to schlep this thing up the stairs of my building. And so from a social point of view, it's not making an awful lot of sense. The economics were a disaster. I think they came out at $16,000. That's my recall on it. And so we just match it up with desirability, feasibility. Sure, it worked. Viability, no, 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 no. And if you think about it, he sure as heck, I mean, as much as he believed in everything he was doing at that moment, it still wasn't making. It certainly didn't make any sense in that particular thing. But now I'm looking at other things dealing with desirability, feasibility, and viability, and I look at things like oh, I don't know, the GM Cruise, the robo taxi. It wasn't really too safe. It's going to take a lot of time. We're finally getting there, taking steps to regain any public trust. I look at gracious lab grown chicken from McDonald's, uh, and they started doing this meat replacement thing, and that's been an absolute disaster. Um, I just look at something really, really, really recently that some of you may affiliate with, and that's Lululemon. Lululemon came out with a line of yoga pants, which seemed they were pretty slick design. They look kind of cool. There was only one problem: you kind of see through them. So there we're going to desirability, feasibility, and viability. So you need to keep this stuff in front of you on an ongoing basis. I have this little squiggle here. It was by a guy named Tim Brennan. Brennan was Apple's creative services lead. Someone asked him to describe design, and he just says it's an absolute enigma, searching for an answer. And so what we're talking about now, and we're looking at a new toolkit. We're really going to be talking about design thinking and what can design thinking do for growth and innovation. And it's clearly what TQM did for quality. It's a very systematic approach to problem solving. It could certainly be taught to managers. Thus, the reason you're all here. it has a very, very, very structured process to it. And I spell it out, I think, very nicely in the book. But what I'm going to do now is start throwing some examples at you after I do just a simple graph to let you know how we think at the studio at Herbst Produkt. And while this is starting out a little mice type, I'm going to walk you through a methodology. So this is 10,000 foot overview. And we start out, we start out with this thing called opportunity recognition. We all individually think there's something going on. There's an opportunity here, and we just put that in its little spot, and we lock it up, and we say there's something here. When I say there's something there, I look at it as two variables. One is improving your current offering, make it better, new and improved. The other is new to the world. I mean, that's my mindset. That's the only way I see all of this development. There are only those two arenas. So let's start marching through this thing a little bit. I'm going to start out, and I'll get into detail, and then I'm going to get into visuals. So I'll make this thing come alive for you. We start out with basic research. We go into an area we call visioning. We take that into concept work. We do reviews. We do research. We reconfirm and confirm channels. We develop and we rinse and repeat as we need to. But let me get specific. So when you're doing research, this is critical. You cannot ever, ever, ever miss this one. You cannot. You must understand the end user. Who are you designing this thing for? Who's going to be the user? And of critical importance, what's going on with the competition? You've got to take a look at that. Critical. You then synthesize it. Okay, this is the bare beginnings. You recognize there's an opportunity. You look at these variables, you study them, you synthesize them, and then you come up with a thing that we call a PRD, Product Requirement Document. If you are not writing a PRD, do not begin your work. It will be a disaster. It cannot be done. It will be an outline of what we're going to be doing. Everybody on all sides understands it. We sign off on it, and that's the start of our march. So now we have a PRD, and we go into this thing that we call visioning. And folks, I'm going to support all of this in just a moment with a visual. This will make, but I have to give you the background here, and I have to just give it to you in outline format. But you'll see in a moment. This will make a lot of sense to you. So in visioning, one of the things we look at, certainly at Herbst Produkt in our studio, we always look at what are the trends and inspirations. What's the technical architecture we're dealing with? What are the insights we will gain from all of that? And that just becomes our ability or our demand unto ourselves that we have to start problem framing this thing. So we're not sketching, we're not designing, we're not creating, we're not doing anything yet. We've started with the research, and now we've got a PRD, and now we're getting into problem framing. And now finally, we can start getting into some conceptual work where we're doing a lot of noodling, a lot of visual brainstorming. We're building some 2D mock-ups. We're building some breadboards. We may be doing some 3D studies. You've been there, you know it. That's the methodology, but I don't want you jumping into it too swiftly. You always review, you always refine, you always iterate. You should be telling a story with this thing. It should be supported with images. We really want to start building this thing. And if you're not, so here's one of the arenas where most of us go wrong, really, really, really wrong. Now you think you know what the heck you're doing. No. Now you go back and research. You really need to start validating what you've just been doing. At that point, you can then go back into the channel, and I will guarantee you there's going to be some refinement. And then you can finally do your finished release documentation, start building your alpha being a looks like, works like, and you might go back and you might start doing rinse and repeat, but this thing is certainly going to evolve. Okay, so I'm going to do a case study here. It's a couple of years back, but it's a good one for Norton. And the issue was, so this is an improved offering. Norton, as you know, resides in your computers, or may, or should, they'd like you to. And they said, we're going into the router business. Okay, so that's an improved offering. So they recognize the opportunity, and they start, and they and we at this point, we start digging in. So it's all about research. Who's doing what? What do they look like? What's happening at retail? And it's more than obvious, just by being out there, boy, there's a oneness to this thing, you know, a bunch of flat, dopey boards with them, stupid little antennas sticking up all over the place, and they're all the same. And so you go into retail and you start talking to people. By the way, that's Scott Herbst, who runs the studio. So we do it. I mean, we don't put this off into third parties. That's really important to say. You've got to be doing it. You have to be out there. You have to be in the field. So here's Scott marching around, part of the team, and looking at what you just looked at. Boy, a bunch of dopey boxes, flat little planes with dopey little antennas sticking up. And then we look into the world market and we look at who's selling what, why are they selling, how are they selling. And then we start looking around. We know we're going to be a higher end unit. We start looking around just to kind of check ourselves with high-end units, what a high-end users deal with in commodity markets. We look at iconic forms. Obviously, had nothing to do with Nest, but here's a sweet little iconic form that replaced the square box of Borg Warners or Stuart Warners, and it worked. The client will always, or your management team or your engineering team is always going to give you a bunch of base inputs. We need so many antennas, we need so many of this, we need that, we need so much RAM, we need whatever it is. And so you're going to get this base input, but I don't ever want you to say we're too early. That is not any kind of a specification per se. It's input. So if you go back to that graph we just laid out, now we get into the framework of doing all of this. We start out, what's the vision? Where are we going with this thing? We look at all of the business objectives. We haven't started sketching. We haven't done anything yet. We want to understand the user journey. What does it take to get them in, to convince them that this is an item? We look at brand, we look at DNA, we look at the competition, we start writing competitive statements, and then we synthesize and we come up with a strategy. So remember, this is created here from a designer point of view, surely, but if you're not digging into the depth of what you're doing, you're going to fall on your nose. So that's why I laid out those earlier graphs so you'll understand methodology. So now I'm going to get visual with you and convert that into what we actually do. Who are we designing for? So we know we're higher end. We want to start bringing some reality, if you will, into the studio. And so we create these trends and inspiration type boards. And we just load the studio with graphics like this. One of the things we do, we happen to be calling this thing a rover, just our internal conversation. We always say what it is and what it is not. And in this case, just the highlights. You're going to get this deck, folks. So it's got to be trusted. It's got to be refined. Has to be authentic. Has to be intuitive. Has to be distinctive. What it is not, it sure as heck is not conventional. It's not complicated. It's not brash. Not mysterious. Not negative. Write a simple little sentence about what each one of those things means, and we just keep marching along. But it's critical. What is this? What we post this stuff. This is real. We tend, I mean, this is a Herbst Produkt issue, but we tend to be very architectural, if you will, very geometric. It works all the time. We don't get swoopy doopy. It's not, it doesn't make any sense. So we're just laying out some really clean, sweet architectural formats that this might possibly take. And then we start doing what designers are expected to do. We go through pounds and pounds and days of just all of this visual brainstorming. And then we take those and we start converting them into some good rock solid 3D renderings. And we just keep going and going and going and going and pounds of doing this stuff. I cannot tell you the amount of time it takes for exploration if you're going to do it right. The problem that too many of us have is we're all pretty smart and we're all pretty good at this stuff. And what I tried desperately to do with my young undergraduate students is really a bunch of smart kids coming in Northwestern. And they're so smart, they just knock down the first thing that comes into their brains and they say, well, that's the answer. It is never the answer. If you're not exploring, if you're not going through pages and pages of this sort of stuff, you're just going to fall on your nose. It's just not going to work. Okay, so we've just gone through a bunch of explorations, visuals, come back. We're going to do formal structured reviews. The entire team, everybody's there, marketing, manufacturing, all of the design team, supply chain, everybody's involved in this stuff. And then we want to get into just the pure architecture, if you will. So we go into these 3D studies, and we'll take the competition as well, by the way, and we just paint everything out in white. And we just want to see what the response may be. So we start validating, and as I noted last time, you go back and research, and you just keep doing it. Once you're solid on that, then you can finally start finishing up all of the engineering. Now, I have to be very, very careful in that there was nothing that was done in any of those previous concepts that did not include the full understanding of how we could modify boards, how we could lay them out, and how they would all integrate with each other. So now we have a complete solid model, complete engineering state. Now we can go into alphas. So alphas, folks, are critical. Looks like, works like. Bring it into a show, bring it to your retailer. They're as real as they are ever going to be. But you have to go on. I mean, you just don't ever walk away. If you're not integrating everything, so now obviously we have to start looking at the screens, we have to start looking at packaging and graphics. OOBE is what's the out of the box experience. I mean, we're a little higher end on this thing, and it better be rock solid and spectacular. And we're not going to turn that over to anybody. The core team has to be doing all of this work. So again, you just start exploring, lots of explorations, finally ending up with real honest to goodness mock-ups that you can take to a retail as well as confirming with research. But you have to nail all of this stuff within the discipline itself. I mentioned storytelling earlier, and we all believe it's critically important. So here we're talking about Bucky Fuller, geodesic domes, World War II, radar in the Arctic, and it's a compelling story. And so we do these stories for all of them, and then we start supporting what the messaging is actually going to be. And then we can finally start introducing this thing. But this design team has to be a critical part of everything you're all doing. And there's so many components and pieces to it that if you let any of it go, it's not going to go well for you. Okay, so we just ended up there with the final. But now I wanted to so that was not new to the world. That was new and improved. But now I want to take the flip side. Brand new to the world. Is it the same? What's the scenario that you play out in this thing? The story that we tell in the book is the reality that a couple of scientists and engineers recognized a very, 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 very serious issue going on in their world. And a common, very diagnostic need was not generally met. And they came up with the number, and we confirmed it, and it was scary as could be that the CDC actually states in one of their publications 50% of all antibiotics prescribed in hospitals are either unnecessary or inappropriate. Wow. That should scare the hell out of anybody. So what's going on? So what these folks were up against and what they were understanding was the reality that if you get pneumonia and it's bad, you end up in the hospital and they stick an IV into you. And they're guessing that what they're putting into you is going to do it. And they've taken a blood sample, by the way, and that's, I hate to tell you this, folks, the complete diagnostic of that blood sample is every bit of 3 days if you want a really complete one. Okay, day 2, it's not working. Stick another needle into you, and let's see if that one works. Day 3, if the first 2 haven't done anything for you, day 3, you're in big trouble. You may die. So these guys figured out using a microfluidic mentality that they could do multiple testing using AI, and they believed that they could get a test done 2.5 hours, maybe 3. Wow. So what scientists tend to do, rightly so, what any of us would expect them to do, is you build a proof of concept. So they have this proof of concept. It works. But man, you got to really start raising lots and lots and lots of money at this point. So now you start going into your finance community and you start looking to see how do you raise money? What's going to happen here? One of the things that tragically takes place, or maybe appropriately takes place, is the finance world really wants a little more proof, if you will, beside the proof of concept that you've got something. Let's go all the way back to those set factors, folks, that is really going to trigger that market. So in our case, we are often sent things like this by the sponsors, if you will, to make it into something that's going to be viable. Remember that word? So what do? We do what we do on every project. Go into the market, start researching, start looking at the labs. And the recognition happens pretty darn swiftly in that, boy, you've got some huge hospital scenarios, big labs, little labs, singular labs, and they're playing with all sorts of machinery. It's all over the place. And so here we have this microfluidics device, and what are we going to do with it? I mean, is it good for everybody? I mean, that's part of the viability, right? So we start going and envisioning and we started recognizing, wait, this thing is a module. We have a computer. It's a module. This thing can grow as it needs to grow. And so we get into, now we're in a concept work, and we just start noodling along and sketching along, and until we can get to a point where we can start mocking up some rough little boards and maybe getting a little more complete, but nevertheless, you have to start doing all these little volume studies and start building a bunch of breadboards to see, does it make any sense? And really charging right along, then we start getting into engineering databases, and then finally we do some testing, and you can see the modularity depending on your lab. The little dark char gray box, that's our computer module. The rest, they're modular. And so we're back into this viability that it will work for this really broad, opportunistic marketplace. Small, large, medium, doesn't matter. This thing can do it. But as I said earlier, if you don't tie this all together, it's still not going to work for you. So branding is critical. We branded it, called Pattern. We do all of the packaging. It's all got to tie together. It cannot be in pieces. Don't start handing this off to other folks. Tie it all together. It's a unified offering, and it's all based on what I'm going to end up here with a phase gating process. So this is more than a little wee bit complicated, but what I want you to understand from an overview methodology to an absolute working document, when I talk about getting in a phase gate as an overall method to do this design work, this can and or should be contractual. So everything we've done prior, the last two examples I showed you all followed phase gate. I wanted to end this session for all of us, though, with giving you not your homework, but giving you something you could take away. And as I said, you're going to get this whole deck, but it's also you'll get it with more detail in the book. I wanted you to walk away with an absolute contractual document that's going to allow you to succeed. Critical, critical, critical. So what's phase gate? A lot of you, there's no doubt, most of you folks know all about this stuff. It's very disciplined, deals with problem resolution, deals with resource allocation, critical, and it deals with the identification of and the reduction of risk. You go through all of these individual stages. They all have lots of little tasks. You complete the task. Management has to do a review. You then have your priorities. Maybe you go, maybe you no go, but you have to do this step by step by step. You have absolute criteria, and you have absolute required deliverables that have to be made, or you go back and you redo a prior step. And the important thing is when you lay these things out in a very formal, structured manner that I'll show in a sec, you get management resource. Everybody understands, holy moly, this is a big deal. The other thing that takes place in phase gate is every time you advance a phase, I can darn near guarantee that the cost and the time is going to be an incredible multiple, 5 to 10 times probably. So you start off here. So I've laid out 7 phases for you all. Phase 0 is just planning. You're beginning to build a business case. I'll get into more detail in a moment. So that's just kind of scratching around. Doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of money, but you got to do it. Phase 1 is now what we talked about earlier. You have to get into your discovery research. You have to do some opportunity mapping, which means once you understand the base, what are your multiples going after that? You do your concept work. I mean, I showed you all of this. We do more preferences research. You consolidate. You finish your engineering. You confirm it through final research, and then you do your release and your tooling. Okay, so that's, in this case, I'm saying 7 because I'm not counting phase 0. But anyway, there's 8 specific cases. And they start out with this business opportunity plan, which I call the fuzzy front end. And we really want to understand everything we can. What's market analysis, what's financial. It's very messy in the beginning and that's why we call it fuzzy. It certainly precedes a more formal process. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable, it's unstructured, and everything then starts getting more structured after that, which is why everything costs more time and more money. So what I'm going to do here, and I'll lock this up in the next 2 to 3 minutes, is I've outlined, and I'm sure as heck not going to read all of this stuff to you at all, but I'm outlining all the increments of all of the phases. So in 0, we have a kickoff, we do market studies, we do business goals, blah, blah. Phase 1, We start wondering by starting with the customer. So it's job immersion. You saw Scott at retail, and then we're in the labs and we're in the hospitals. We're understanding voice of the customer. We get into more research. We start getting into concept development. And by the way, when you're doing research, and I spend time on this in the book, don't ever, ever, ever use the F word, which is focus groups. They are a disaster. They are biased. They will take your work to a different dimension that will generally not work out well for you. So I'm just doing that little outline for you. Don't do it. So we continue with explorations, technical feasibilities, more refinement, more research, and I'm very specific on each of these as to what takes place. And finally, in engineering development, then we're doing agency reviews. Okay, so that takes you through that takes you through the book, sort of. Please get it. It's trust me, I make maybe 8 cents a piece and 10 cents a piece on these books, so it's for your benefit, not for mine. I needed it for my students, to be perfectly honest. And now I'm just going to open it up and throw it back to the board.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions in the chat. In the beginning, Sandy kind of made an interesting statement, and maybe we want to start there, but he mentioned that you were calling out disasters, and he wanted to sort of speak to the fact that maybe they're learning and that some failures could eventually
Oh
lead
my
to
gracious.
successful products.
Absolutely. But yeah, but how big a failure do you want? I mean, that's really the question, right? So I will tell you, I mean, working for who would be one of the largest corporate clients we have, when we do when we believe everything is absolutely right on a mass produced product, well, let me give you a real story. So 1 million years ago, we're the guys that created the grip type of pens that everybody has now. It's a little squishy at the end, kind of. And that was done for paperweight division of Gillette. We introduced that in the St. Louis area. We knew it was good, but we didn't want to produce 10 million. So we produced, I don't know, 500,000. And so you're 1,000% correct in the learning, but be careful about how much money you're spending on the learning. And if you have a process, yeah, they're disasters, but they may be. You don't want them to be, but at least you could limit them. You could do that through what we call, beta development, which is small run development. Maybe you're only going to do 5,000. So I support that 100% because as much as we believe we know everything, maybe you don't. So just following the giants that we're involved with, we may just do some really limited beta production and putting it into smaller markets, just final confirmation. So yeah, yes, I use the word disaster because depending on who you are, entrepreneurial, large corporation, you can't have that 80% failure in the marketplace. It's just too time consuming and too expensive. Does that answer? I hope.
Yeah, no, that no, that did answer. I think sometimes your customer base is so wide that there will be some failures. I mean, I worked for Intel for many years, and you probably know the multiplication problem in a very
Yep.
specific situation that was occurring, right? Technically, it met all the three criteria that you outlined, but the combinations of possibilities that for some portion it could go wrong could reflect all the way back, saying people think, oh my god, this product itself, whole thing is a failure.
Right.
So
Let me
I think
advance that a bit, and it's also regional. You have to recognize that what works southwest does not work northeast or southeast. So that's the variable you're playing with. But I want to make a very, 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 very important point. You cannot satisfy everyone. Don't do it. If you're not getting a love affair, don't do it. if you're getting out of research, Northeast, Southeast, Southwest, yeah, that's pretty good. Don't do it. It's a disaster. Get a love affair. I really want that product.
Yeah. Okay.
So our next question is from Peter. The first box in your process is opportunity recognition. There is always lots of opportunities. What is your advice on how to decide which opportunities to pick up and take through the whole process?
That's just what you do. You take that whole list and you start doing some research with the list, and you just start seeing where might you hit that little buzz love affair. You have to get to that I need it, I want it, as opposed to that's kind of cool. So that's the only way we can par a list down is we play with a couple of variables, and then we decide which might be the best. But we don't play with 20 variables on a list. Those are done through what we call kitchen research with our own internal groups, as opposed to going out into the public. So we'll take that initial list of opportunities and just play it amongst our own. When I say our own, it could be pretty large group depending on the organization. But nevertheless, we keep it internal, and we try and make our best guess on it.
And that pivots a little bit. Kenise had asked, when should a company know when to pivot or abandon? Is there a number?
When to abandon? Well, as you're going through phase gate and as you're going through the research, and one of the points that we go out of our way to make is the reality that you should stop and or go back and correct. And that's if you don't structure this up front with formal reviews after all of these gates, you're just going to keep marching to the end. And that scares the living. I mean, that scares the hell out of me. You just can't do that. So when you read any of the other, and I say this with accuracy, when you read any of the other academic type books that talk about product design and development, they're always missing that last step of going back into the market and doing your research and just revising. Just march right back to the earlier step, do your corrections. But what has always frightened me is the teaching methodology that says, well, do your research and develop it and produce it. No, who the heck does that? So to me, there's always room to go back and revise, and that's why you get into alphas, and that's why you get into betas, so that you really are going to nail it when you do a full multi-cavity tooling release. It should not be. You should not have any risk at that point. I mean, we seem to be Herbst Produkt. It seems to be one of the most successful product design innovation firms in the country because we live by this. We absolutely abide by this. In all honesty, it sounds egotistical, and I don't mean it to be, but we've never fallen in the marketplace. I mean, we know because we followed this like the Bible.
And then Tom asked, I mean, this builds again on that. Can you talk about the effect that time constraints have on your process?
Yeah, there's always time to do it over again, isn't there? I mean, that's the one that bothers me, right? I mean, you're always going to have somebody banging on your head because we have to make the next show, CES, whatever the show is. That's why we are fine with the recognition that if you need to make that show, at least we can get some more preliminary indication, even though we can't ship, that we'll go in with alphas. And we do that a lot, by the way. And that we cover that in a book a little bit, and quite a bit. Actually, in TJ's story, we cover it. It is not unusual that we will do serious research at the show. We'll just take an alpha into the show, depending on the client's budget, rather than running around the country. Heck, bring it into a show, see what you get from who, and see what your pre-orders are. And it's not going to kill you, by the way, if you're dealing with pre-orders and shipment isn't going to be for the next quarter. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. At least you're living with the viability that it's going to sell through, because they're going to carry it. It's going to get pushed through. So that's one way to just mitigate the time value relationship. Is bring it in and get the response and get an honest to goodness order. I mean, what bothers me is the reality that products don't last very long in the marketplace if you miss. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is the recognition of S curves. And I'll sort of draw an S curve with my finger. So we're building. Maybe we get to the show, selling, retailing. There's an inflection point somewhere, but you don't know where it is. And with that inflection point, since you don't know where it is, you better be on Rev 2 as soon as you're ready to release Rev 1. That's really, 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 really critical, because you're learning all the way. And I will guarantee you, I cannot find anything out there that does not have an S curve to it. They will eventually all flatten. They will eventually all crash. And the smart guys are recognizing it as an inflection point someplace, and you jump in and you're working on the next row. Always.